Jesus is not going to be surprised by what happens with the Canaanite woman. He's aware of what the goal is here, and the goal is to bring a blessing to the Gentiles, and he's aware that that's where all this is heading.
Let's start to unpack a little bit more about Jesus's response to her, because that starts to get us into this accusation that he used a racial slur.
Okay, so now we'll talk about Jesus, and I actually want to start back a little bit earlier in Matthew, because I think there are some key passages that we need to keep in mind so we can understand what he's doing here. And the first one is in Matthew 8:5-13. And this is the passage where the centurion comes to him and wants Jesus to heal his servant. Now, remember, the centurion is not Jewish. So we're in a very similar situation here. So this is how Jesus responds after, I should summarize this quickly. The centurion shows a great amount of faith because he says, Jesus, you don't need to come to my house. I'm not worthy of seeing you. And he's showing his humility there. I'm not worthy of you coming to my house. You can heal from far away as well as you can heal at my house. So Jesus says, this is amazing faith. So here's what he says after that. And I think this is really important. Now, when Jesus heard this, the response of the centurion, he marveled and said to those who were following, truly, I say to you, I have not found such great faith with anyone in Israel. I say to you that many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into the outer darkness. In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So right here, what we see already is that exact same imagery of the table. Just as he has that imagery of the table with the Canaanite woman, he's using the same imagery here. And here in chapter 8, he's saying because of people's faith, because of the faith of Gentiles, they will come from east and west, and they will not just get the crumbs from under the table, they will recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob because of your faith. So Matthew, in telling the story or giving this account, he's already setting up the idea that Jesus is going to say that faith is more important than ritual. And so that's key. That's already been set up in chapter 8. And we already know Jesus is willing to help Gentiles and that Gentiles will get into the kingdom ahead of the Jews who do not have faith in him. So that is where I want to start. Next, we see another place where we see Jesus's relationship with the Gentiles in Matthew 12, and this is verses 17-21. And it talks about Jesus fulfilling the prophecy of bringing light to the Gentiles. And here's what it says. At first it says that, Jesus healed people. And then it says, this was to fulfill what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet. Behold, my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he shall proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel, nor cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A battered reed he will not break off, and a smoldering wick he will not put out, until he leads justice to victory. And in his name, the Gentiles will hope. So what I'm trying to set up here is that Jesus is not going to be surprised by what happens with the Canaanite woman. He's aware of what the goal is here, and the goal is to bring a blessing to the Gentiles. We mentioned that back from Genesis, the promise made to Abraham. And he's aware that that's where all this is heading. So I think that is also context we need to keep in mind. Now we get to chapter 15. And before we even get to her story, we come on really important things happening at the beginning of the chapter. So right at the beginning of the chapter, he's talking to the Pharisees. And what he says is about the Pharisees is, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. So what we're going to see here in this chapter is a contrast between the Pharisees and the woman. The Pharisees they're following these laws, they're trying to do these rituals, but they don't actually have faith. They don't actually love God. They're not actually following God. They've set up these other rules that they have to follow. And so Jesus is already setting up the idea right at the beginning of this chapter where Matthew's writing. He's setting up the idea that being merely born into the covenant isn't the key. What's key is faith. And so then you get a little farther into the chapter, into verse 11, and he says, "It is not what enters into the mouth that defiles the man, but what proceeds out of the mouth. This defiles the man." So he's talking about, the Pharisees think if they follow all these rules, that will give them righteousness. But Jesus is saying, no, it's not that you're following these rules that's the key thing. Your sin is actually coming out of you. You are sinners. And he says again, do you not understand that everything that goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is eliminated, but the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those defile the man. And this leads directly into the story where Matthew is going to contrast the Pharisees with the woman. The Pharisees who they don't have a heart for God, but they have the law. And the Canaanite woman who doesn't have the law, but actually has faith in Jesus as she should. So this whole contrast has been set up. Matthew goes right into the story here. And now we come to the actual passage here. Now, did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I just want to make a couple of observations, because what you're really pointing out here is a very important practice that I want to encourage people to do when you're studying the Bible. And I can't emphasize this enough, is I think that one of the great difficulties, because somebody said in the chat on YouTube, the Bible is hard to interpret sometimes. And that is absolutely true. But what can be of help is when we have read the context forward and backwards, but also when we know the big story of the Bible, the way that Amy is displaying for us. Because what we don't want to do is just interpret a Bible verse and just zoom in for that close up. Rather, we got to zoom out a little bit to a mid shot, and then we got to zoom all the way out to the wide shot, and then come back to the verse, because the Bible is many books, and it's also tells one big story. And we have to kind of know how to go both places. And in order to do that, you do have to understand something about covenants, but also having a skill of reading through the book of Matthew a few times. When I teach Bible study skills, when we're going through a book of the Bible, what I have my students do is, by the time we've gone through our whole study on the Bible, on a book of the Bible, they've read through that book several times, and they start noticing, oh, this story here sounds like it has a parallel with this story here. And so when Amy is highlighting this issue of like the centurion and that healing and connecting it with this other healing of the Syrophoenician woman's daughter, well, oh, look, they're both Gentiles. There's some commonalities here. Now, that might seem like she's doing some kind of magic tricks, but what you have to know is that Amy is a student of the Bible, and part of being a student of the Bible is reading through, a book of the Bible, maybe multiple times, until you start seeing where a verse, a section, a larger section fit into the overall flow of the book. And this is vital if we're going to properly interpret the Bible.